Right now, pilots are reporting something terrifying. Their planes are dropping altitude without explanation, instruments going haywire mid-flight. The culprit? Not some interstellar visitor everyone's obsessing over, but our own sun, which just unleashed a monster. A sunspot cluster wider than Earth erupted with an X-1.9 flare, and it's only the beginning. We're a level 0 civilization playing Russian roulette with technology we barely understand, and the odds just got worse. Scientists whisper about something called a superflare, an event that could erase our grid in minutes. Stay until the end, because what's brewing on our star's surface makes 3i Atlas look like a cosmic sideshow. The countdown has already started. If you're as captivated by this unfolding story as I am, hit that like button and subscribe. This is developing in real time and you won't want to miss what happens next. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, your local time, and what you think about this new development. Part 1. Core Claim. Picture this. November 11th, 2025. Your phone lights up with a news alert. Airbus grounds 6,000 jets worldwide. You scroll further. Another headline. Emergency software fix ordered after mid-air incident. Then another. Radiation levels at cruising altitude reach highest point in 2 decades. And somewhere in the background of all these stories there's an image you might have missed. The sun. Not the gentle yellow circle we drew in kindergarten, but a roiling ball of plasma. Its surface torn open by magnetic violence, hurling charged particles toward Earth at millions of miles per hour. While everyone's been watching the skies for some mysterious interstellar visitor called 3i/Atlas, something far more immediate has been unfolding. Something that's already grounded nearly 6,000 commercial aircraft. Something that's already sent passengers to the hospital. Something that's exposing just how terrifyingly fragile our technological civilization really is. Here's the core thesis, and I need you to understand this clearly. Forget 3i/Atlas. The real existential dice are being rolled by our sun today, not in some distant hypothetical future, not in a science fiction movie. Right now, as you're listening to this. Let me hit you with the data, fast and hard, because this is real, and it happened weeks ago. On November 11th, 2025, the Sun unleashed a massive X5.1 class solar flare from an active region designated NOAA AR 14,274. Think of an X-class flare as the heavyweight champion of solar eruptions. This wasn't just any flare, it was followed by a fast-moving coronal mass ejection, a billion-ton cloud of magnetized plasma racing toward Earth. The event triggered something called a ground-level enhancement, designated GLE-77. That's a rare occurrence where solar particles are so energetic they actually penetrate Earth's magnetic shield and atmosphere, reaching ground-based detectors. Neutron monitors across the globe recorded the impact. These aren't casual measurements. These are sophisticated instruments designed to detect the most dangerous cosmic radiation events. But here's where it gets genuinely alarming. High-altitude radiation probes, including those launched by the University of Surrey, recorded radiation levels at commercial aviation altitudes, the height where you sit drinking your complimentary beverage, up to 10 times normal background levels. 10 times. The highest readings in nearly 2 decades. Those aircraft cruising at 35,000 feet. They were flying through a radiation storm that would have been unthinkable during most of modern aviation history. Then, within weeks of that solar outburst, the aviation world experienced something unprecedented. Almost 6,000 jets, specifically the Airbus A320 family, the world's best-selling, single-aisle aircraft, were grounded worldwide. Not for a routine maintenance check, not for a minor software update, for emergency fixes after a mid-air incident on a JetBlue Airways flight. The aircraft involved, and thousands like it, rely on sensitive electronic flight control computers. Computers that, it turns out, are vulnerable to high-energy radiation, the kind of radiation that was slamming into Earth's atmosphere just weeks earlier. This grounding represents the largest in Airbus's entire history. Let that sink in. The largest grounding ever, potentially linked to something that happened 93 million miles away. So here's the question I want you to sit with. If the sun can cause this much disruption already, ground thousands of aircraft, threaten passenger safety, expose critical vulnerabilities in systems we trust with our lives every single day, what else might it do? What happens when the next flare hits? What happens if the next one is bigger? What's coming in this investigation will take you through 3 acts. First, we'll examine exactly what happened, the timeline of the trigger event, the JetBlue incident, and the global aviation response. We'll look at the anatomy of the failure, how a single bit flip in a computer can turn a routine flight into an emergency. Second, we'll go deeper into the forensics, the anomalies, the competing theories, and yes, some of the more speculative edges of this story. We'll explore ground-level enhancements, cosmic rays, the behaviour of that monstrous sunspot complex, and even some fringe theories that are circulating right now. Third, we'll zoom out to the broader context. What else is happening in 2025 that should inform how we think about this risk? What are the lessons from other scientific breakthroughs? And most importantly, what can we actually do about it? This isn't a science fiction dystopia. This isn't fear-mongering. This is a sober assessment grounded in hard events that happened just weeks ago. Events that most people scrolled past, that got buried under other news cycles, that didn't register as the potential turning point they might actually be. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. We've built a level 0 civilization. We've constructed a global network of interdependent digital systems, satellites, power grids, flight computers, GPS navigation, financial transactions, emergency services, all running on the assumption that space is calm, that the sun will behave, that cosmic threats are something that happen to other planets, in other star systems, not to us. But the sun doesn't care about our assumptions, and in November of 2025, it gave us a warning shot. The question is, are we going to listen, or are we going to keep watching the skies for interstellar visitors while our own star prepares to throw another punch, one that we might not walk away from? Stay with me, because what comes next will change how you think about every flight you take, every time you turn on a light, every moment you assume the systems around you will just keep working. Part 2, Anatomy of the Trigger, the JetBlue case and Airbus response. Let's rewind to October 30th, 2025. It's a routine day in commercial aviation. Thousands of flights are in the air. Passengers are reading, sleeping, scrolling through movies. Flight crews are executing procedures they've performed thousands of times. And then, somewhere over the southeastern United States, routine becomes nightmare. JetBlue Flight B6-1230, travelling from Cancun, Mexico to Newark, New Jersey, is cruising at altitude. Everything appears normal. The autopilot is engaged, as it typically is during cruise flight. The sky is clear, weather is calm, and then, without warning, the aircraft pitches down. Not gently, suddenly. Violently enough that passengers are thrown against their restraints. Loose items fly toward the ceiling. Screams fill the cabin. The pilots scramble to regain control, disconnecting the autopilot, manually pulling the aircraft back to level flight. They declare an emergency and divert to Tampa International Airport. Passengers are injured, some seriously enough to require medical attention on landing. This is the incident that triggered everything that followed. And here's what makes it so deeply troubling. There was no obvious mechanical failure. No bird strike, no engine malfunction, no weather event. The aircraft simply, inexplicably, commanded itself to dive. Airbus launched an immediate investigation. Aviation authorities got involved. Engineers began combing through flight data recorders, maintenance logs, software versions, hardware configurations. And what they discovered pointed to something that most passengers, and frankly most pilots, had never seriously considered as a threat: data corruption in the flight control computers. Specifically, the elevator aileron computer, known as ELAC, which runs software version L104 used in A320 family jets. The analysis flagged intense solar radiation as a potential cause. Let me explain what this means in terms anyone can understand. Modern commercial aircraft don't fly the way they used to. There's no direct mechanical linkage between the control stick and the control surfaces. Everything is mediated by computers. When a pilot moves the stick, that input goes to a computer, which interprets the command, checks it against flight parameters and safety limits, and then sends signals to actuators that move the ailerons, elevators, and rudder. This is called fly-by-wire. It's generally considered safer and more efficient than older mechanical systems. But it has one critical vulnerability. It depends entirely on the integrity of digital data. Now imagine a single bit of data in that computer's memory, one of billions of microscopic switches that hold information, gets flipped. Not by a software bug, not by a hardware failure, but by a charged particle, a proton accelerated by the sun to near light speed, slamming into the semiconductor chip and physically altering the state of a transistor. One bit flips from 0 to 1 or 1 to 0. That's all it takes. That one incorrect bit could be in a critical control parameter. The autopilot reads it, interprets it as a command, and the aircraft responds. It's like a cosmic static burst flipping random switches inside your car's computer while you're driving on the highway, except you're not on the highway. You're at 35,000 feet with hundreds of people on board, and the only thing between you and a catastrophic crash is the speed at which the pilots can recognize and override the error. This wasn't theoretical anymore. This had happened, and the implications were staggering. Airbus didn't hesitate. They issued an emergency airworthiness directive. Airlines around the world received orders for a fleet-wide rollback or patch of the ELAC software. Every affected aircraft needed manual updates. Technicians had to physically access each plane, connect ground support equipment, load new software, verify the installation, test the systems. It's not a 5-minute job. Each aircraft required hours of work, and there were over 6,000 of them. Think about the operational ripple effects. Airlines had to pull aircraft out of service rotation. Flights were delayed. Cancellations cascaded through the schedule. Passengers were stranded. The shortage of qualified technicians became acute. Maintenance crews worked around the clock. Supply chains felt the pressure. And all of this happened during what should have been a routine operational period, not even during peak holiday travel. Imagine if this had occurred in December. There's also a human dimension here that can't be ignored. Passengers on that JetBlue flight experienced genuine terror. They were injured. Some may never feel safe flying again. Confidence in aviation safety, built over decades of steadily improving statistics, took a hit. For many people, this felt like something out of a science fiction thriller. Cosmic radiation causing a plane to dive. That's not supposed to be real, but it was. And here's the first big takeaway from all of this. This was not a mechanical breakdown. It wasn't pilot error. It wasn't a maintenance oversight. It was a space weather-induced software failure. A category of risk that aviation systems, despite their sophistication, were not adequately designed to handle. The protective bubble that our technology presumed, the assumption that space is a benign environment, turned out to be thinner than anyone wanted to admit. Modern fly-by-wire aircraft, marvels of engineering that they are critically vulnerable to strange high-energy events from space. Events that we can't always predict. Events that don't announce themselves with dramatic warnings. Events that can strike silently, invisibly, and still pack enough punch to send a plane into an uncommanded dive. The question now becomes, if this can happen to aircraft, what else is at risk? Part 3, the Airbus Precaution and Global Grounding. Within days of the JetBlue incident analysis, Airbus made a decision that reverberated through the entire global aviation industry. The message went out to airlines worldwide. Ground affected jets until software fixes are completed. This wasn't a suggestion. This wasn't a when you get around to it advisory. This was an emergency directive, and the number was staggering. Roughly 6,000 aircraft. That's approximately half of the global A320 fleet, the most common single-aisle airliner in the world. Let's break down what that fix actually entailed, because this wasn't a simple over-the-air update like your phone gets at 3 in the morning. For most aircraft, it required a software rollback or patch to the ELAC control logic. Technicians had to access the aircraft's maintenance computers, load verified software versions, run diagnostic checks, and certify the installation. For certain older aircraft in the fleet, hardware replacement might be necessary. The process for each plane took approximately 2 to 3 hours of hands-on work by qualified technicians, assuming no complications. Multiply that by 6,000 aircraft. Now consider the cascading logistical challenge this created. Airlines operate on razor-thin margins. Fleet availability is everything. Routes are planned months in advance. Crews are scheduled. Gates are reserved. Passengers have tickets. The entire system is optimized for maximum efficiency, which means there's almost no slack in the system for mass disruptions. When you suddenly have to pull half your A320 fleet out of service, even temporarily, the ripples spread instantly. Airlines scrambled to rebook passengers. Alternative aircraft were deployed where possible, but you can't just swap a narrow body for a wide body without consequences for gate compatibility, fuel planning, crew qualifications. Supply chains felt the strain. spare parts, software media, test equipment. The global network of maintenance facilities wasn't designed to handle 6,000 aircraft needing the same update simultaneously. Technician availability became a bottleneck. You can't just pull certified aircraft technicians out of thin air. There's training, certification, experience requirements. And with busy travel seasons always on the horizon, this created a compound pressure that some airlines are probably still working through. The regulatory layer added another dimension. The European Union Aviation Safety Agency, known as EASA, issued an Emergency Airworthiness Directive. Regulations in aviation aren't optional, they're legally binding. Airlines must comply or face grounding by regulatory authorities, which is even worse than voluntarily grounding for a fix. Similar directives likely came from the Federal Aviation Administration in the United States and other regulatory bodies worldwide. This was coordinated mandatory action across the global aviation system. Think about the financial fallout. Airlines operate on schedules. When you disrupt the schedule, you disrupt revenue. Passengers demand refunds or rebooking. Cargo doesn't get delivered. Business travelers miss meetings. Vacation plans collapse. The reputational risk is real. Seat shortages in affected markets drove up prices, creating secondary economic effects. Long-term investors started asking hard questions about aviation safety and technology risk. And there's another angle that hasn't fully played out yet: the potential chip shortage for hardware-level fixes. If certain aircraft require new components, and those components use semiconductors that are already in constrained supply, globally, then delays compound further. Here's the structural takeaway from all of this, and it's bigger than just aviation. Modern civilization is built on fragile interdependent systems. We've optimized for efficiency, for cost reduction, for just-in-time logistics. We've eliminated redundancy because redundancy is expensive. We've created networks where a disruption in one node cascades through the entire system. And when it comes to space weather, we've treated it as an astronomy curiosity, not as a systemic threat. The grounding showed in stark terms how brittle global infrastructure is to a big solar event. And here's the uncomfortable question. If jets are vulnerable, what about satellites? What about power grids? What about GPS navigation, which every smartphone, every ship, every autonomous vehicle, every precision agricultural system depends on? What about the financial systems that rely on GPS for timestamping transactions? What about emergency services that depend on satellite communication? Are all of these systems similarly fragile? Are we one big solar flare away from a cascade that makes 6,000 grounded jets look like a minor inconvenience? The Airbus grounding wasn't just a technical fix, it was a warning, a preview of what happens when space weather stops being a theoretical concern and becomes an operational reality. And the truly unsettling part, the solar storm that likely caused this wasn't even a worst-case scenario. It was big, yes, but the sun is capable of far worse. The Carrington event of 1859, the biggest recorded solar storm in history, happened when humanity had telegraph wires, not flight computers and satellite networks. If a Carrington-class event hit today, the grounding of 6,000 jets would be a footnote in a much larger catastrophe. We don't just need better forecasting. We need systemic resilience. We need infrastructure designed with space weather in mind. We need redundancy, hardening, backup systems, operational procedures for cosmic storms. Because the next time we might not get a warning, we might not have days to issue directives and patch software. The next time, the sun might throw a punch that knocks us flat before we even know what hit us. And that brings us to the question, what exactly happened on the sun in November 2025? What was this monster that woke up and started throwing charged particles at Earth? Part 4. The Sun. What actually happened in NovDec 2025. Let's talk about NOAA AR 14,274. That's the official designation for the sunspot complex responsible for the chaos. And when I say complex, I mean it was one of the most magnetically volatile regions the Sun has produced during solar cycle 25. Observations from ground-based telescopes and space-based satellites showed a dramatically stressed magnetic configuration. Twisted penumbral filaments, strong shear along the polarity inversion line. If you're not a solar physicist, those terms might sound abstract, but here's what they mean. This sunspot was a bomb waiting to go off. The magnetic field lines in the Sun's photosphere, the visible surface layer, were twisted like a spring under tension. When those field lines reconnect, they release energy. Enormous amounts of energy. More energy than all of humanity has ever produced in its entire history, released in minutes. That's a solar flare. And this region was primed for a big one. Let me walk you through the timeline step by step because the sequence of events matters. Early November saw a series of M-class flares from this region. M-class flares are medium strength, significant but not catastrophic. They were warning shots. The magnetic tension was building. Solar physicists were watching. Some were quietly concerned. The configuration was getting worse. Then, November 11th, 2025, at approximately 10:04 UTC, the region erupted. An X5.1 class solar flare, one of the most powerful classifications we have. The flare itself is a burst of electromagnetic radiation, X-rays and extreme ultraviolet light that races toward Earth at the speed of light. It hit our atmosphere in about 8 minutes. Radio communications on the sunlit side of Earth were immediately disrupted. High-frequency radio, the kind used for transoceanic aviation communication and emergency broadcasts, went silent across Europe, Africa and parts of Asia. Blackouts lasted 30 to 60 minutes. But the flare was just the opening act. The real danger was the coronal mass ejection that followed. Imaging from the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory, known as SOHO, and other satellites captured a halo CME, which means it was aimed directly at Earth. 1 billion tons of magnetized plasma, travelling at speeds up to several million miles per hour, was headed our way. Arrival time, approximately 36 to 48 hours. Around November 12th to 13th, the CME reached Earth's magnetosphere. But it wasn't just one CME, it was 3 in quick succession. When multiple CMEs arrive close together, they can interact, merge, amplify each other's effects. The resulting geomagnetic storm was classified as severe. Satellite operators went into high alert mode. Power grid managers watched nervously as induced currents began flowing through long transmission lines, threatening transformer stability. And then there was GLE-77. Ground-level enhancements are rare. Only about 70 to 80 have been recorded since scientists started monitoring them in the 1940s. They occur when solar energetic particles, protons accelerated to near light speed, are energetic enough to penetrate Earth's magnetic field and atmosphere, reaching ground-based detectors. Neutron monitors at the South Pole recorded a spike of approximately 120% above baseline. Mid-latitude monitors also registered increases. This wasn't just space weather affecting space. This was space weather reaching the surface. High-altitude balloon probes launched by the University of Surrey and other research groups recorded radiation levels at commercial flight altitudes up to 10 times normal background. 10 times. Pilots and passengers on flights during that period were exposed to radiation doses typically only seen during much rarer events. The doses weren't immediately dangerous, but they were measurable, significant, and deeply concerning for anyone thinking about long-term exposure or cumulative effects. The immediate effects for Earth were widespread. GPS disturbances affected precision navigation. Auroras appeared at unusually low latitudes, visible from places that almost never see them. Satellite operators reported increased radiation flux, which can degrade solar panels, damage electronics, and reduce satellite lifetimes. Communication disruptions affected aviation, shipping, and emergency services. But here's the critical point. While infrastructure damage was minimal this time, the potential was real and measurable. Space weather agencies like the European Space Agency collected massive datasets. They're analysing cascading risks, trying to model what a slightly bigger storm might do. Because this storm, as big as it was, wasn't a worst-case scenario. It was a serious event, yes, but the Sun is capable of far more violence. Solar telescopes captured magnetograms, images showing the magnetic field structure of the active region. Extreme ultraviolet imaging showed bright points, flare ribbons, and post-eruption arcades, the signatures of magnetic reconnection on a massive scale. Coronagraph images showed the CMEs expanding outward, ghostly halos of plasma racing through space. Neutron monitor data showed the ground-level enhancement in real time, a global network of detectors lighting up as solar protons rain down. This is not rare in the sense of once in a century. This is happening now, and the Sun isn't done. We're in solar cycle 25, approaching what might be a peak in activity, more sunspots, more flares, more CMEs. The probability of another event like November 11th or bigger is not negligible. It's something we should be planning for, preparing for, building resilience against. But are we? Or are we just crossing our fingers and hoping the sun behaves? Part 5. Why this is worse than just an aurora. Let's confront a dangerous misconception right now. A lot of people think solar flares mean pretty auroras and maybe some minor radiostatic. They picture the northern lights dancing over Iceland, tourists taking photos, a beautiful natural spectacle, and sure, that's part of it. But that's like saying a hurricane is just some interesting clouds. It fundamentally misses the point. Here's the cascading risk chain, explained in simple terms. Solar flare or coronal mass ejection or energetic particles are released from the sun. They travel through space. When they reach Earth, they interact with our magnetic field and atmosphere. Charged particles slam into satellites, into the upper atmosphere, into power grid hardware. They cause radiation surges at altitude. And here's where it gets real. Those particles can hit semiconductors. They can flip bits in computer memory. They can corrupt control signals. They can cause satellites to glitch. They can induce currents in power lines that overload transformers. They can disrupt GPS. They can knock out high-frequency radio communications. Now trace those effects forward. Flight control failures like we saw with JetBlue. Satellite navigation outages, affecting everything from your phone's map app to precision agriculture to military operations. GPS-dependent infrastructure suddenly goes blind. Power grids experience cascading failures as transformers blow out. Communication networks collapse when satellites fail, or ground stations lose contact. The interconnected systems we depend on every single day start falling like dominoes. Let me give you concrete examples. During the November 11th storm, high-frequency radio communications were disrupted across Europe and Africa. Aviation relies on HF radio for transoceanic flights, where there's no ground-based radar coverage. Pilots couldn't communicate with air traffic control for periods of time. GPS errors were reported in multiple regions. Satellite operators recorded elevated single-event upset rates, meaning cosmic rays and solar particles were causing more bit flips than normal in satellite electronics. These are measurable, documented consequences. Now imagine a storm 10 times stronger. Or 100 times stronger, because the sun is capable of that. The Carrington event of 1859 was estimated to be significantly more powerful than anything we've experienced in the modern technological era. Telegraph operators received electric shocks. Telegraph wires caught fire. Auroras were visible near the equator. And that was with 19th century technology. Imagine that same storm hitting today's interconnected, digitally dependent civilization. Here's where we get into risk matrix thinking. Low probability, high impact. The kind of event that doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's catastrophic. Our current infrastructure is optimized for nominal conditions. Clear skies, calm space weather, business as usual. We don't design for worst-case cosmic storms because they're rare, and designing for them is expensive. So we build fragile systems and hope for the best. But here's the thing about interconnected systems. When one fails, it can trigger cascading failures across the network. A power grid goes down, and suddenly data centers lose power. Servers crash, internet infrastructure fails, financial transactions halt, emergency services can't communicate, hospitals switch to backup generators, but those have limited fuel. Supply chains break because logistics systems depend on GPS and satellite communication. Within hours, a solar storm becomes a systemic crisis. And there's an uncomfortable historical point here. Older, less technologically dependent societies might have handled a big solar storm differently. They had less to break. But our modern digital civilization is uniquely exposed. We've built a world where nearly everything depends on electronics, satellites, precise timing, constant connectivity. We've eliminated the redundancy that older systems had simply because they were less efficient. We've created a house of cards and the sun is holding a match. This is not an aesthetic natural phenomenon. This is a systemic threat to modern civilization's digital electronic backbone, and the November event was a preview, not the main feature. The main feature is still out there, waiting in the sun's magnetic chaos, and we have no idea when it's coming. So what do we do? Do we just accept this vulnerability? Do we hope it never happens? Or do we start asking harder questions about what's really going on? What anomalies might be lurking in the data, what we're missing? Because there are anomalies. Strange things that don't quite fit the standard narrative. And that's where we go next, into the forensics, the unexplained events, the edges of what we understand. Stay with me, because this is where it gets truly unsettling. Part 6. The Clear Sky Mystery. Altitude drops without flares. Here's where the story takes a strange turn, and I need you to pay close attention because this is where the official narrative starts to crack. The JetBlue incident happened on October 30th, 2025. That's the date. Now here's the problem. When you look at space weather logs for October 30th, there's no major solar flare recorded. Geomagnetic indices were calm. Solar wind was nominal. By all standard measures, space weather that day was quiet. So how did an aircraft experience what appears to be a radiation-induced bit flip when there was no radiation storm? That's the paradox. And it's a paradox that opens up some deeply troubling possibilities about what we don't understand regarding cosmic radiation and its effects on our technology. Let me lay out the competing hypotheses, and I want to be clear. These are speculative. They're not confirmed, but they're being discussed by people who think seriously about these risks. First hypothesis, a cosmic ray single event upset. Cosmic rays are high-energy particles from outside our solar system, from supernovae, pulsars, maybe even more exotic sources. They're always present, constantly bombarding Earth. Most of them are deflected by our magnetic field or absorbed by the atmosphere, but at high altitudes, at cruising altitude for commercial jets, the shielding is much less effective. A single high-energy cosmic ray could, in theory, strike a semiconductor chip in a flight computer and flip a bit. It's rare, but not impossible. Second hypothesis, an unreported microground-level enhancement or localized particle event. Maybe there was a small burst of solar energetic particles that wasn't detected globally, but happened to be in the right place at the right time to hit that particular aircraft. Space weather monitoring isn't perfect. There are gaps in coverage. It's possible something slipped through. Third hypothesis, a software bug or race condition that was aggravated by environmental conditions. Maybe the radiation didn't cause the bit flip directly, but created conditions, combined with thermal stress or data buffering timing issues, that triggered a latent bug in the software. This is less dramatic but still concerning because it suggests the software isn't as robust as it should be. Fourth hypothesis, pure coincidence, a maintenance issue or hardware fault that had nothing to do with radiation. The timing with the November solar storm is coincidental, and we're seeing patterns where none exist. Let's evaluate these. Cosmic rays are always present, so the first hypothesis has plausibility. We know single event upsets happen in satellites, in spacecraft electronics. Aviation electronics at altitude have less shielding than ground-based systems, so they're more vulnerable. But cosmic ray-induced SEUs in commercial aircraft are supposed to be extremely rare, vanishingly unlikely. Except, how do we know? How many incidents have gone unreported or been attributed to other causes? The second hypothesis is harder to evaluate because it depends on detection gaps. If there was a localized event, we'd need very specific monitoring data that might not exist. The third hypothesis is plausible from a software engineering perspective, but it doesn't explain why this particular bug would surface now on this flight, if it's been lurking in the code all along. The fourth hypothesis, coincidence, is always possible, but it feels like intellectual surrender when the timing is this suspicious. Now let me walk you through a hypothetical timeline, the kind of reconstruction a software engineer or avionics expert might do. Cosmic rays strike semiconductor in the ELEC computer. The particle has enough energy to ionize a path through the silicon, creating a temporary conductive channel. A bit flips in a critical memory location, maybe a control parameter for pitch angle or autopilot response. The computer reads the corrupted data. It interprets the data as a command or a sensor reading. The autopilot, trusting the data, issues a control signal. The aircraft pitches down. All of this happens in milliseconds, faster than a human can perceive, let alone react. Here's what frustrates me about this. We probably won't ever know for certain what happened on that flight. The kind of telemetry data that would definitively prove a cosmic ray strike, error register logs, memory dumps, detailed hardware diagnostics, that data is rarely made public. Aviation incident investigations prioritize safety recommendations, not public transparency about rare edge case failure modes. So we're left with plausible scenarios and no smoking gun. But even if we can't prove this specific incident was cosmic ray-induced, the fact that it's plausible should terrify us. It reveals a blind spot in how we model flight safety risk. We design systems assuming certain threat models: mechanical failure, pilot error, weather, maybe even terrorism, but cosmic radiation as a threat vector? That's not something most safety assessments seriously consider. And the reason is simple. It's rare, it's hard to predict, it's hard to test for, and it's expensive to harden systems against it. Here's the deeper implication. We're not just worried about big, obvious solar flares that show up on every space weather monitor and trigger alerts. We also have to worry about small, stealthy, rare, unpredictable cosmic blips, the kind that don't announce themselves, the kind that hit quietly and invisibly, but still pack enough punch to flip a bit, corrupt data, and send an aircraft into an uncommanded dive. How do you defend against that? How do you even know when it's happened? The answer is, we don't. Not really. We're flying blind, hoping the odds stay in our favour, hoping that the 1 in a million cosmic ray doesn't hit the one critical bit at the one critical moment. And every day, thousands of flights take off, cruise at altitude and land safely. But every day, the cosmic dice are rolling, and one day, the dice might come up snake eyes. Part 7. Ground Level Enhancements, GCRs, and the ionizing particle environment. Let's zoom out and talk about the bigger picture of the particle environment Earth sits in, because this isn't just about solar flares. There are multiple threats, multiple types of high-energy particles, and they behave differently. If you want to understand the risk, you need to understand the players. First, solar energetic particles, known as SEPs. These are protons and heavier ions, accelerated by solar flares and coronal mass ejections. When the sun erupts, magnetic reconnection and shock waves accelerate particles to a significant fraction of light speed. These particles race outward from the sun. If they're aimed at Earth, they arrive in minutes to hours depending on their energy. They can penetrate satellites, affect spacecraft electronics, and, during the most extreme events, reach deep into Earth's atmosphere. Second, ground level enhancements, or GLEs. These are a subset of SEP events, the most extreme ones, where particles are energetic enough to penetrate Earth's magnetic field and atmosphere all the way to ground-based detectors. Neutron monitors at research stations around the world detect these events. GLEs are rare. Only about 70 to 80 have been recorded since scientists started systematic monitoring in the 1940s. That's less than 2 per year on average, and the distribution is uneven. Some solar cycles produce many, others produce few. Third, galactic cosmic rays, or GCRs. These are high-energy particles from outside our solar system. Supernova remnants, pulsars, maybe active galactic nuclei. They're constantly present, a background radiation that varies with the solar cycle. When the sun is active, its magnetic field is stronger, which actually deflects more cosmic rays away from the inner solar system. So paradoxically, during solar maximum, GCR flux decreases. During solar minimum, GCR flux increases. Right now, as we potentially approach, or are in solar maximum, we're in a phase where both SEP risk and baseline GCR flux are elevated. Fourth, secondary atmospheric showers. When a high-energy primary particle, either from the sun or from deep space, hits Earth's atmosphere, it collides with air molecules. This creates a cascade of secondary particles: neutrons, muons, pions, gamma rays. These secondaries can reach lower altitudes, even sea level during extreme events, and they carry enough energy to cause single-event upsets in electronics. Now let's focus on GLE 77, the event from November 11, 2025. Neutron monitors detected increases ranging from about 60% to 120% above baseline, depending on location. South Pole monitors, which have excellent sensitivity due to their location and the geometry of Earth's magnetic field, saw the highest increases. Mid-latitude stations also registered anomalies, which is significant because mid-latitudes are where most commercial aviation happens. Satellite instruments confirmed elevated SEP flux. High-altitude balloon probes launched by research groups measured radiation at flight altitudes. Here's the critical point. Commercial aircraft fuselages provide minimal protection against high-energy protons and neutrons. The aluminum skin and internal structure offer some shielding, but it's not nearly enough to stop the most energetic particles. Flight crews and passengers are exposed. Typical. Exposure on a transatlantic flight might be equivalent to a chest X-ray. But during a GLE, that exposure can spike significantly. It's not immediately dangerous for a single flight, but cumulative exposure for flight crews over their careers becomes a concern. And for electronics, the risk isn't cumulative radiation dose, it's single event effects. One particle, one hit, one bit flip. Let me explain single event upsets in more detail. A high-energy proton passes through a semiconductor chip. It ionizes atoms along its path, creating a track of charge. If that track passes through a transistor or memory cell, it can temporarily or permanently alter the state. A 0 becomes a 1 becomes a 0. If that bit is in a critical location, say a control register or a data buffer, the consequences can be immediate and severe. The system reads bad data. It makes a bad decision. This isn't theoretical. Satellites experience SEUs regularly. Space agencies design spacecraft with radiation-hardened components, error-correcting memory, redundant systems, precisely because they know this is a real threat. But commercial aircraft, they're not designed with the same level of redundancy or hardening because the threat was considered negligible. After all, how often do GLEs happen at just the wrong time, in just the wrong place, hitting just the wrong component? Not often, but not never. And here's the uncomfortable math. GLEs are rare, but they're not one-in-a-century events. They're more like one-in-a-few-years events. And with thousands of commercial flights in the air at any given moment, each with multiple flight computers, each with billions of transistors, the probability space starts to look less comforting. It's a numbers game. Most of the time, nothing happens. But eventually the cosmic dice roll badly. We also need to talk about the solar cycle modulation. Right now, solar cycle 25 is ramping up. More sunspots, more flares, more CMEs, higher SEP flux. At the same time, the solar magnetic field is stronger, which actually reduces GCR flux slightly. But the increased frequency of SEP events more than compensates. We're entering a window where both the frequency and intensity of radiation threats are elevated. And this window might last for years. So here's the question. Regulatory bodies and aviation engineers should be asking, what's the acceptable risk threshold? How many SEU events per year are tolerable? How do we even measure that when most SEUs go undetected or unreported? And if we decide the risk is too high, what do we do about it? Retrofit aircraft with radiation-hardened components, implement better error detection and correction in flight software, establish radiation monitoring networks and reroute flights during high radiation events. All of those solutions are expensive, complex, and politically challenging. The easier path is to do nothing, assume the risk remains low, and hope we get lucky. But November 2025 showed us what happens when luck runs out. Part 8. Sunspot complexes, sympathetic flaring, and global magnetic instability. Let's dig into the beast itself. NOAA AR 14,274, the sunspot complex that started all of this. Because understanding what made this region so dangerous helps us understand what might come next. Active region 14,274 wasn't just a sunspot. It was a magnetically complex monster, classified as beta gamma delta. That classification refers to the magnetic structure. Beta means multiple sunspots with opposite magnetic polarities. Gamma means the polarities are intermingled, creating strong magnetic shear. Delta means umbrum, the dark cores of sunspots, of opposite polarity are close together, within a single penumbra. When you combine all three characteristics, you get a region that's primed for major eruptions. High-resolution observations from solar telescopes, including the 1.5-meter Gregor telescope, captured incredible detail. Twisted penumbral filaments, the thread-like structures in the outer regions of sunspots, showing torsion and shear, small-scale brightenings, signatures of magnetic reconnection happening continuously at small scales, evolving filament structures, dark features suspended in the solar atmosphere by magnetic fields, stretched and stressed. All of these are signs that the magnetic field is storing enormous amounts of energy, like a coiled spring under tension, and when that energy releases, it does so explosively. One of the fascinating and terrifying aspects of complex active regions like this is sympathetic flaring. Here's how it works. One subregion erupts. The eruption destabilizes the magnetic field in neighboring subregions. Those regions, already stressed, then erupt in response. It's a cascade, a chain reaction, and it makes eruptions more frequent and harder to predict. Imagine a row of overloaded circuit breakers. One trips, and the sudden load shift causes others to trip in rapid succession. That's sympathetic flaring. Now let's talk about the modelling challenges. Solar physicists use magnetohydrodynamics, or MHD, to model the sun's magnetic field and plasma behaviour. These are some of the most computationally intensive simulations in all of science. They're trying to capture the behaviour of a turbulent magnetised plasma with temperatures in the millions of degrees, across scales from kilometres to hundreds of thousands of kilometres. Even with supercomputers, the models have limitations. They can't capture every instability, every small-scale reconnection event, every trigger for a flare. Forecasting is probabilistic at best. And here's the uncomfortable truth. We can observe a dangerous active region. We can measure its magnetic complexity. We can watch it evolve. But we can't predict with certainty when it will erupt, how big the eruption will be, or whether the resulting CME will be aimed at Earth. We're watching a bomb, knowing it's going to explode, but not knowing when or in which direction the shrapnel will fly. Between November 9th and 14th, 2025, AR 14,274 produced multiple CMEs. Some were Earth-directed, some were glancing blows, some missed entirely. When multiple CMEs launch in quick succession, they can interact in space. A faster CME can overtake a slower one, merging and creating what's called a cannibal CME. The shock strength increases, the magnetic field becomes more complex, the impact on Earth's magnetosphere becomes more severe. This is a risk multiplier that standard forecasts don't always account for. Coronagraph imagery from satellites like SOHO captured these CMEs expanding outward. Halo CMEs, where the structure appears to surround the occulting disk in the coronagraph image, indicating the CME is headed toward or away from the observer. Multiple overlapping halos over a few days, a clear sign of a hyperactive region launching projectile after projectile into space. Solar cycle 25 is not finished. We might be entering, or already in, a peak phase. That means more frequent and potentially more intense eruptions. The window of elevated risk could remain open for months or even years. Every active region that develops with high magnetic complexity is another potential trigger for a major event. And the sun, frustratingly, doesn't care about our infrastructure, our schedules, our safety margins. Here's the strategic question. If the sun becomes significantly unsettled again, if another AR 14,274 equivalent develops, are we better prepared than we were in November? Have airlines updated their software? Have satellite operators adjusted their operational protocols? Have power grid managers improved their monitoring and response systems? Or are we just hoping it doesn't happen again? The answer, I suspect, is uncomfortable. Some improvements, yes. But systemic resilience, comprehensive hardening, probably not, because that would require investment, coordination, political will, and a public that understands the risk. And right now, most people still think solar storms are just pretty lights in the sky. The sun isn't a gentle neighbour, it's a volatile, middle-aged star with violent magnetic moods. When the pressure builds, when the field lines twist and shear and finally snap, the consequences propagate across the solar system at millions of miles per hour. And we're sitting here, 93 million miles away with our fragile electronics and interconnected systems, hoping we don't get hit. That's not a strategy. That's a gamble. Part 9, Speculative Edges, 3i Atlas, Planetary Alignments and Other Fringe Theories. Now we enter the speculative zone, and I want to be absolutely clear about what we're doing here. We're exploring hypotheses that are not confirmed, not supported by mainstream science, and in some cases not even plausible given what we know about physics. But they're part of the conversation happening right now in certain corners of the internet, and they reflect deeper anxieties about our vulnerability to cosmic forces. So let's examine them, responsibly, with clear labels on what's verified and what's speculation. First, the 3i/Atlas connection. 3i/Atlas is an interstellar object, a comet from outside our solar system, that passed through the inner solar system. The speculation goes like this. What if this object, or its debris field, somehow influenced solar activity? What if its passage through the inner solar system, particularly during superior conjunction, when it was on the far side of the sun from Earth's perspective, triggered or amplified magnetic instabilities in the sun, leading to increased sunspot activity or larger flares? Let's break this down. What would such a mechanism require? You'd need a way for an interstellar object, which is magnetically insignificant compared to the Sun, to trigger large-scale magnetic reconnection in the solar photosphere or corona. There's no known physical mechanism for this. Comets are tiny. The Sun is massive. The magnetic fields involved are orders of magnitude different. Mainstream solar physics finds this idea implausible because there's simply no precedent, no observed mechanism, no theoretical framework that would support it. Could there be unknown physics? Could there be interactions we don't understand? In principle, yes. Science is always open to revision. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and right now there's no evidence. No peer-reviewed studies, no observational correlation that withstands scrutiny. It's an intriguing what-if, but nothing more. Second, the grid resonance theory. This one's more technical. The idea is that global power grids, operating at 50 or 60 Hz, create electromagnetic oscillations that propagate into space and interact with Earth's radiation belts, the Van Allen belts. These belts trap charged particles. If power grid harmonics somehow resonated with the natural oscillation frequencies of these trapped particles, it could theoretically destabilize the belts, causing particles to precipitate into the atmosphere, increasing radiation at lower altitudes. What would need to be true for this to work? You'd need the power grid frequencies to couple efficiently into the magnetosphere, which is not obvious. You'd need the resonance to be strong enough to significantly perturb trapped particles. You'd need this effect to be large enough to matter, to actually increase radiation levels in ways that affect infrastructure. And you'd need observational evidence. Right now we don't have that. It's speculative physics without empirical support. Third, the Superflare hypothesis. This one is grounded in astrophysics but still speculative for our Sun. Astrophysical observations show that some stars, including Sun-like stars, can produce superflares. These are flares orders of magnitude more energetic than anything we've recorded from our Sun. The question is, could our Sun produce a superflare? And if so, what would trigger it? The data suggest our Sun is older and magnetically quieter than stars observed producing superflares. Models don't put an imminent superflare at high probability. But low probability is not zero probability, and if a superflare did occur, the consequences would be catastrophic. Satellites destroyed, power grids obliterated, communication networks collapsed. Possibly even direct atmospheric effects, ozone depletion, increased surface radiation. It's science fiction adjacent, but not impossible. Now let's evaluate these theories using a risk matrix, evidence versus impact. The 3I/Atlas connection has no evidence, but, if true, would imply unpredictable solar triggers. Low credibility, moderate hypothetical impact. The grid resonance theory has no strong evidence, but if true, would suggest human activity is contributing to radiation belt instability. Low credibility, moderate hypothetical impact. The superflare hypothesis has some astrophysical precedent but low probability for our Sun. Low to moderate credibility, but catastrophic impact if it occurred. Here's why exploring these ideas matters, even if they're unlikely. They reflect our cultural narrative about cosmic risk. They reveal how much we don't know. They force us to confront the limits of our understanding, and in some cases, they're proxies for legitimate concerns that are harder to articulate. The fear isn't really that an interstellar comet triggered a solar flare. The fear is that we're vulnerable to forces we can't control, can't predict, and aren't prepared for. And that fear is justified, even if the specific mechanism is wrong. The fringe theories are seductive because they offer explanations for why things are happening now, why we're experiencing these events. But without evidence, they remain speculative. They're hypotheses, not facts, and treating them as facts is dangerous because it distorts our understanding of real risks and diverts attention from actionable responses. So where does that leave us? With a Sun that's volatile and unpredictable, with infrastructure that's fragile, and with a lot of uncertainty about what might come next. The mainstream explanation that we're in an active phase of solar cycle 25 and experienced a major but not unprecedented solar storm is almost certainly correct. But the fact that people are reaching for alternative explanations tells us something important. We're scared, we're confused, and we don't trust that the institutions responsible for our safety are taking this seriously enough. And maybe, just maybe, that distrust is warranted. Because the next question is, who knew what? When did they know it? And what did they do about it? Part 10. Hidden social and political angles, asymmetric information, insider actions and resilience politics. Let's talk about information flow, because this is where things get murky. The JetBlue incident happened on October 30th, 2025. Public announcement of the grounding came days later. But internal corporate discussions, engineering analysis, safety reviews, those probably started immediately. There's always a gap between when insiders know something and when the public knows. That gap is where decisions get made, and not all of those decisions are transparent. Who knew what and when? Airbus engineers were analysing flight data within hours of the incident. They would have known quickly if the telemetry suggested a control system anomaly. Aviation regulators were informed, airlines were briefed. But passengers, the public, they learned when the grounding was announced, after the decisions had already been made behind closed doors. This is standard procedure in aviation safety, but it creates information asymmetry, and information asymmetry raises ethical questions. Should companies disclose cosmic risk vulnerabilities earlier? Should there be public databases of radiation-related incidents in aviation? Who decides what the public needs to know? Right now, the answer is the companies and regulators decide, and they tend to err on the side of caution, which often means limited disclosure. The rationale is that you don't want to panic people, especially when the risk is low and the incidents are rare. But limited disclosure also means limited public pressure for systemic fixes. Consider liability and insurance. If a known risk leads to passenger injury, lawsuits follow. Airlines and manufacturers might face legal exposure. Insurers might demand operational changes or higher premiums. There's a financial incentive to downplay or obscure the cosmic radiation angle. Not necessarily through malicious intent, but through the natural dynamics of risk management and liability mitigation. If you can attribute an incident to a software bug or a maintenance oversight, that's more controllable, more insurable, than attributing it to an unpredictable cosmic event. Now let's zoom out to resilience politics. Global infrastructure is built on assumptions of environmental stability, calm space weather, predictable solar output, minimal cosmic ray flux. These assumptions are embedded in engineering standards, safety margins, operational procedures, but those assumptions are being challenged. With increasing space weather volatility, do we need public investment in hardening systems? Should governments fund radiation shielding research, grid resilience upgrades, satellite redundancy programs? The problem is that these investments are expensive and the benefits are diffuse and long-term. Politicians don't get re-elected for spending billions on infrastructure hardening that prevents hypothetical disasters. They get re-elected for visible, immediate projects. So there's a political economy problem. The incentives are misaligned. The people who bear the cost of inaction, the public, are not the same as the people making the investment decisions, the policymakers and corporate executives. And the costs of inaction are backloaded. They only become visible when disaster strikes. Public perception is another layer. Framing this as a space weather apocalypse could panic people. Flights get cancelled, tourism drops, economic activity slows. But underplaying the risk, treating it as negligible, leads to unpreparedness. How do you balance awareness and calm? It's a communication challenge, and one that public health officials, disaster managers, and risk communicators struggle with constantly. Too much alarm and people panic, too little, and they're complacent. Historical analogues are instructive. The 1859 Carrington event is the most famous solar storm in recorded history. It caused spectacular auroras visible near the equator. It disrupted telegraph systems, the only electrical infrastructure of the era. Operators received shocks, wires caught fire, but the societal impact was limited because there wasn't much electrical infrastructure to disrupt. Today, a Carrington-class event would be catastrophic. Power grids down for weeks or months, satellites lost, GPS offline, communication networks crippled. The economic cost could be trillions of dollars. So what does a responsible public policy response look like? First, transparency from manufacturers about known vulnerabilities. Airlines and aerospace companies should disclose cosmic radiation risks in flight systems, just as they disclose other safety-critical information. Second, mandatory radiation hardening audits for critical infrastructure. Aviation, satellites, power grids, communication networks. Identify vulnerabilities, prioritize fixes. Third, public funding for resilience. Grid upgrades, satellite spares, backup communication systems, improved space weather forecasting. Fourth, international coordination. Space weather doesn't respect borders. We need global monitoring networks, shared data, coordinated emergency response. But here's the deeper question, the cultural and philosophical one. As humans push further technologically, are we building systems that assume cosmic calm and ignore cosmic reality? We've created a high-tech civilization that's exquisitely tuned for nominal conditions but brittle under stress. We've optimized for efficiency at the cost of resilience. And now, we're discovering that the universe doesn't guarantee nominal conditions. The sun has moods, cosmic rays rain down constantly, and our electronics, for all their sophistication, are vulnerable to forces we barely understand and can't control. The vulnerability isn't just technical, it's social, institutional, political. It's about how we make decisions, how we allocate resources, how we balance short-term costs against long-term risks. And right now, we're not doing a great job. We're reactive, not proactive. We wait for disasters to happen, then scramble to respond, instead of building resilience in advance. And that's a choice we're making collectively, even if most people don't realize it. The November 2025 events were a warning, a preview. The sun gave us a taste of what it can do. The question is, will we learn from it? Will we invest in resilience? Or will we shrug, assume it was a one-off, and go back to business as usual? Because if we choose complacency, the next solar storm might not give us a second chance. Part 11. Rapid exoplanet atmospheric escape. Implications for planetary resilience. Let's shift perspective for a moment and look beyond our solar system, because sometimes the best way to understand our own vulnerability is to see it reflected in distant worlds. In 2025, astronomers observed something remarkable. A giant exoplanet being stripped of its atmosphere in real time by intense stellar radiation. This wasn't a slow, gradual process observable only through long-term monitoring, the kind of change that unfolds over millions of years and must be inferred from models and simulations. This was rapid, dramatic, measurable atmospheric loss happening on human-relevant timescales, months and years rather than epochs. The planet in question orbits a young, active star, the kind that makes our middle-aged sun look positively sedate. The star's radiation output, its stellar wind, its frequent flares, they're all hammering the planet's atmosphere with unrelenting ferocity. Spectroscopic observations showed atmospheric constituents being ejected into space, creating a comet-like tail of escaping gas stretching millions of kilometers behind the planet in its orbit. Hydrogen, helium, heavier elements, all streaming away, lost forever to the interstellar void. The planet is literally bleeding its atmosphere into space, molecule by molecule, under the relentless assault of its host star. The observations came from multiple telescopes working in concert. Space-based observatories captured ultraviolet and X-ray emissions. Ground-based instruments measured spectral absorption lines as the planet transited its star. The data was unambiguous. The planet's upper atmosphere was being heated to tens of thousands of degrees by stellar radiation, reaching escape velocity and flowing away into space. Researchers calculated mass loss rates in the billions of kilograms per second. At that rate, the planet could lose a significant fraction of its atmosphere over tens of millions of years. Geological time. Yes, but trivial compared to the age of most planetary systems. This particular exoplanet is a hot Jupiter, a gas giant orbiting extremely close to its star, far closer than Mercury orbits our Sun. The proximity means intense heating, fierce stellar winds, and continuous bombardment by high-energy particles. The planet lacks a strong magnetic field to deflect the stellar assault, leaving its atmosphere exposed. What astronomers are witnessing is atmospheric stripping in action, the process by which planets can transform from gas-rich worlds to barren cores over their lifetimes. Now, why does this matter for us? Because it illustrates vividly how stars can drastically alter planetary environments. Our Sun may be older and calmer than the star in that exoplanet system, a main-sequence yellow dwarf rather than a young, hyperactive stellar adolescent, but it's still capable of violence. The same fundamental physics applies. Stellar radiation heats atmospheres. Stellar wind carries plasma that interacts with magnetic fields. Flares and coronal mass ejections hurl energetic particles. The differences are quantitative, not qualitative. And while Earth's atmosphere isn't going to be stripped away anytime soon, our planet's magnetic field provides robust shielding, and we orbit at a comfortable distance where solar effects are manageable under normal conditions. Our technological atmosphere, the layer of satellites, electronics, power grids, communication networks, that's far more fragile. That's what's at risk when the sun throws a tantrum. We've built a fragile shell of technology around our planet, systems that enable modern civilization but that have no evolutionary defenses against space weather, no built-in resilience against cosmic radiation or geomagnetic disturbances. Think of it as a metaphor. That exoplanet losing its atmosphere to stellar radiation is like humanity losing its protective shell of functioning technology to solar storms. The mechanisms are different. We're not dealing with atmospheric escape, but with electronic failures, induced currents, radiation damage, but the outcome is similar. A sudden, catastrophic degradation of the systems that make life comfortable, or even possible, on the surface. Just as that exoplanet's atmosphere provides thermal regulation, weather patterns, and potential habitability, our technological infrastructure provides communication, power, transportation, food distribution, medical care, and all the other systems modern society depends on. Strip away the exoplanet's atmosphere, and you have a barren, inhospitable world exposed to the full fury of stellar radiation. Strip away our technological infrastructure during a major solar storm, and you have a civilization suddenly thrust back toward pre-industrial conditions, with billions of people dependent on systems that no longer function and no immediate means to restore them. The analogy isn't perfect, but it's instructive. What we take for granted as stable and enduring can be removed rapidly when subjected to forces we didn't adequately prepare for. The breakthroughs in exoplanet monitoring are genuinely impressive. Spectroscopy allows astronomers to analyze the composition of distant atmospheres by looking at the light filtering through them during planetary transits. When an exoplanet passes in front of its star from our perspective, starlight travels through the planet's atmosphere before reaching Earth. Different molecules absorb different wavelengths, creating characteristic signatures in the spectrum. By analyzing these signatures, astronomers can identify atmospheric components, water vapor, methane, carbon dioxide, sodium, hydrogen, and track how their abundance changes over time. Real-time tracking of atmospheric changes gives us a live-action view of star-planet interactions. Instead of inferring processes from snapshots separated by years or decades, astronomers can now monitor continuous evolution. They can watch as stellar flares temporarily enhance atmospheric escape. They can measure how stellar wind pressure varies with stellar activity cycles. They can observe tidal effects, chemical reactions, and dynamic responses to changing stellar conditions. It's planetary science transformed from static description to dynamic observation, from theory to verified reality. And these observations aren't just academic curiosities, interesting only to specialists studying distant worlds we'll never visit. They're teaching us about how stellar environments shape planetary habitability. They're showing us, in stark terms, that stars are dangerous. Stars give life, providing energy for photosynthesis, warming planetary surfaces, driving atmospheric circulation, but they also threaten it. The same radiation that enables biology can destroy it. The same stellar wind that shapes magnetospheres can erode atmospheres. Habitability exists in a narrow band where stellar benefits outweigh stellar dangers, and maintaining that balance requires either natural defenses like magnetic fields and atmospheric mass, or artificial defenses like shielding and hardened infrastructure. This has implications for how we model solar threats. If we can observe atmospheric escape in real time on exoplanets, we should be able to model, with increasing accuracy, how solar storms affect Earth's near-space environment, our magnetosphere, our upper atmosphere, and by extension, the technology embedded in that environment. The physics is scalable. The equations governing plasma interactions, magnetic field dynamics, and particle acceleration don't change between stellar systems. What differs are the parameters: stellar luminosity, planetary distance, magnetic field strength, atmospheric composition. But the underlying mechanisms are universal. The lessons are transferable. Observations of how stellar flares affect exoplanet atmospheres inform models of how solar flares affect Earth's ionosphere. Measurements of stellar wind pressure on exoplanets calibrate predictions of solar wind impacts on our magnetosphere. Data on particle acceleration in distant stellar systems improve our understanding of energetic particle events near Earth. Every exoplanet observation becomes a data point for validating and refining the models we use to forecast space weather and assess its impacts, and the message is clear. Proximity to an active star is a liability, not just a source of warmth and light. We celebrate our sun for enabling life on Earth, for providing the energy that drives our biosphere, for creating the conditions that allowed humanity to emerge and flourish. All true, but that same sun poses continuous threat. It's not malicious, stars don't have intent, but it's dangerous nonetheless. And as our civilization becomes more technologically sophisticated, more dependent on electronics and power grids and satellite networks, we become more vulnerable to the very star that sustains us. Astronomy in this sense is not just about distant worlds, not just about cataloguing exoplanets or searching for biosignatures or mapping the structure of galaxies. It's about understanding our place in the cosmos, our vulnerability, our long-term prospects. Every exoplanet losing its atmosphere is a reminder that planetary environments are not static, not guaranteed, not safe from stellar violence. Planets exist in dynamic, sometimes hostile stellar environments. Their survival, and the survival of any life or civilization they host, depends on having adequate defenses or building them. And if a high-tech civilization like ours is going to survive long-term, it needs to take that threat seriously. We've built a technological civilization in a benign-seeming environment during a period of relatively low solar activity, without experiencing catastrophic space weather events. That's fortunate, but it's also misleading, because it creates the illusion that the environment is always benign, that the sun will always be well behaved, that our infrastructure will never face cosmic-scale threats. The exoplanet observations remind us that this complacency is dangerous. Other worlds are being ravaged by their stars right now. We're seeing it happen. And while Earth's situation is different, the fundamental vulnerability remains. Consider the broader implications. If we're observing atmospheric loss on exoplanets in real time, then any advanced civilization on those planets, assuming they exist, would be experiencing catastrophic environmental degradation on timescales far too rapid to adapt to biologically. Their only hope would be technological, building underground habitats, creating artificial atmospheres, developing space-based infrastructure, or emigrating to more stable worlds. In other words, civilizations facing severe stellar threats must become spacefaring or perish. There's no third option. We're not facing atmospheric loss, but we are facing infrastructure vulnerability. The choice is similar. Either we harden our systems, build resilience, prepare for solar storms, and develop the technology to withstand cosmic threats, or we remain vulnerable and hope we get lucky. Hope is not a strategy. Luck runs out, the exoplanets being stripped, exoplanets being of their atmospheres didn't choose their fate. They orbit where they orbit, subject to the stars they orbit. But we can choose. We can build infrastructure that survives solar storms. We can design systems with redundancy and hardening. We can prepare. So here's the takeaway. What we see in distant planetary systems may foreshadow how vulnerable even an advanced civilization like ours really is when a star goes wild. We're not immune. We're not protected by some cosmic exemption that says Earth gets special treatment because we're clever or because we've built cities and satellites. We're subject to the same forces, the same physics, the same risks as every other planet orbiting every other star. Our sun is a star. Stars emit radiation, generate particle storms, produce flares and coronal mass ejections. That's what stars do. And unless we build resilience, unless we harden our systems and prepare for the worst, we might find ourselves in a similar situation, not losing our atmospheric protection, but losing our technological one, watching our infrastructure evaporate under the onslaught of solar fury. The exoplanet observations are a mirror held up to our own fragility. They show us what happens when planetary defenses fail, when stellar violence overwhelms protective systems. The scale differs, the mechanisms differ, but the lesson is universal. Living near a star is inherently risky, and survival requires either natural resilience or engineered defenses. Earth has some natural defenses, our magnetic field, our atmospheric mass, our orbital distance, but our technology has none. We've built systems that assume benign conditions, that break down when those conditions change, and the cosmos is showing us, in real time on distant worlds, what happens when assumptions fail and defenses prove inadequate. We have the knowledge, we have the technology. What we need is the will to apply them, to take cosmic threats seriously, to invest in resilience before disaster forces us to. The exoplanets can't choose their fate, we can. The question is whether we will. Part 12. Fusion progress and what it means for resilience. Let's talk about energy, because energy is the foundation of everything. Civilization runs on energy. Our cities, our industries, our communication networks, our transportation systems, our food production, our water treatment, our hospitals, all depend on reliable electricity. When the power goes out, everything else fails, and the way we generate, distribute, and consume energy shapes our vulnerability to cosmic threats in fundamental ways. In 2025, nuclear fusion research hit several significant milestones. Facilities like the National Ignition Facility reported increased energy yields, more stable plasma control, improved prospects for near-term practical fusion power. Private fusion companies achieved record plasma temperatures and confinement times. International collaborations. Advanced reactor designs. Investors poured billions into fusion startups, betting that commercial viability was within reach. This is not cold fusion pseudoscience. This is mainstream, heavily funded, peer-reviewed research, making steady progress toward a goal that has eluded scientists for 70 years. The breakthroughs are technical but consequential. Scientists achieved net energy gain repeatedly, producing more energy from fusion reactions than the lasers or magnetic fields consumed to initiate them. Plasma stability improved, with reactions sustained for longer periods. Materials science advanced, developing walls and containment systems that can withstand the extreme temperatures and neutron bombardment inside fusion reactors. Computational models became more accurate, allowing researchers to predict and control plasma behavior. Each advance brings practical fusion power closer to reality. Fusion, if it becomes viable and widely adopted, could fundamentally change how societies build infrastructure. Instead of massive, centralized power plants connected by vulnerable long-distance transmission grids, we could have smaller, distributed fusion reactors, local power generation, resilient microgrids, less dependence on the kind of infrastructure that's catastrophically vulnerable to geomagnetic storms. The current energy paradigm concentrates generation in large facilities, coal plants, nuclear stations, hydroelectric dams, located wherever fuel, cooling water, or geography dictate, often hundreds of miles from population centres. Power flows through high-voltage transmission lines spanning continents, a system optimised for efficiency and economies of scale, but inherently fragile. Here's why that matters for solar risk. When a geomagnetic storm hits, it induces currents in long transmission lines. These geomagnetically induced currents flow through transformers, the critical components that step voltage up for long-distance transmission and step it down for local distribution. Transformers are designed to handle normal electrical loads but not the quasi-DC currents induced by geomagnetic disturbances. The induced currents cause transformers to overheat, saturate their magnetic cores, and potentially fail catastrophically. Internal insulation melts. Windings short-circuit. The transformer becomes a twisted mass of scorched metal. Repairing or replacing large transformers takes months, sometimes years. They're custom-built for specific locations, weighing hundreds of tons, manufactured by a handful of specialized facilities worldwide. They're expensive, millions of dollars each, and not stockpiled in large numbers because of their cost and specificity. Lead times for new transformers can exceed a year under normal conditions. After a major geomagnetic storm that damages dozens or hundreds simultaneously across a continent, the replacement timeline could stretch much longer. A major geomagnetic storm could knock out grid sections for extended periods, leading to cascading failures across regions or even continents. Without power, water systems fail, communication networks collapse, fuel distribution stops, food refrigeration fails, hospitals exhaust backup generators. The cascades are swift and brutal. But if you have distributed power generation, if communities or even individual buildings can generate their own electricity with small fusion reactors, the grid becomes less of a single point of failure. You still have vulnerabilities, communications, control systems, fuel supply, but you've reduced the catastrophic risk of a continent-wide blackout. You've built in redundancy. Instead of one massive failure, you might have many small manageable outages. A transformer failure in a distributed system affects a neighborhood, not a region. Repair resources can focus on individual units, rather than rebuilding entire grid sections. Recovery time drops from months to days. Distributed fusion reactors could operate independently, or as nodes in a smart microgrid, sharing power with neighbors during normal operations but capable of islanding, disconnecting from the broader grid during emergencies. This architecture mirrors how modern military bases and critical facilities already operate. They maintain grid connections for routine power, but have backup generators that automatically take over during outages. Fusion reactors could provide that capability at community scale, ensuring schools, hospitals, water treatment plants, and emergency services maintain power even when the regional grid fails. Fusion also offers another advantage. It doesn't depend on weather, on fuel supply chains vulnerable to disruption, or on environmental conditions. Solar panels produce no power at night or during storms. Wind turbines require wind. Hydroelectric dams need water flow. Natural gas plants need pipeline delivery. Coal plants need rail or barge transport. Each has dependencies that can fail during emergencies. Fusion is baseload power, available on demand, as long as you have fuel, typically deuterium extracted from water and lithium or tritium bred in the reactor itself, and the reactor is functioning. The fuel requirements are minimal. A fusion reactor could operate for months on fuel that fits in a truck. There are no combustion products, no greenhouse emissions, no meltdown risk like fission reactors. In a post-solar storm scenario, where conventional grids are down, supply chains are disrupted, and emergency services are strained, having localized self-contained power generation could be the difference between societal continuity and collapse. Communities with functioning fusion reactors could maintain water systems, communication networks, medical facilities, and food refrigeration. They could become refuge points, stabilizing regions while damaged grid infrastructure is repaired. The psychological impact matters too. When people see that power is available, that basic services continue, panic subsides, social cohesion holds, recovery begins. Now let's be realistic. Fusion isn't here yet. The engineering challenges are immense. Achieving net energy gain in experimental conditions differs vastly from building reliable, economical reactors that can operate continuously for decades. Materials must withstand neutron bombardment without becoming brittle. Tritium breeding must be perfected. Control systems must be refined. Manufacturing must scale from one-off experimental devices to mass production. Regulatory frameworks must be developed. Public acceptance must be won. Even the most optimistic projections put commercial fusion power a decade or more away, with more conservative estimates extending to the 2040s or beyond. And even when it arrives, deployment will take time. Infrastructure doesn't turn over overnight. The existing power grid represents trillions of dollars in sunk investment. Utilities operate on long planning horizons. New power plants take years to permit and construct. Replacing centralized generation with distributed fusion would require regulatory changes, financing mechanisms, workforce training, and public buy-in. The transition would span decades, not years. Early fusion reactors will likely supplement, not replace, existing grids, providing baseload power at centralized facilities before gradually transitioning to distributed models. But the trajectory is clear. Fusion is coming, and it has the potential to reshape energy infrastructure in ways that make civilization more resilient to cosmic threats. The physics works, the engineering is advancing, the investment is flowing. Barring unforeseen obstacles, commercial fusion will arrive within the lifetimes of people alive today. When it does, the opportunity to build resilience into our energy systems will be unprecedented. We could choose distributed architectures, prioritize hardening and redundancy, design for worst-case cosmic events, or we could replicate existing centralized models, optimizing for cost and efficiency while ignoring resilience. The choice is ours. There's a speculative scenario worth considering. Imagine a near-future world where fusion power is widespread, where hardened infrastructure and space weather forecasting combine to create a civilization that can withstand major solar storms, not without disruption, but without collapse. Satellites have backups, redundant systems, shielded electronics, on-orbit spares ready for rapid deployment. Grids are distributed and hardened, fusion reactors in every town, transformers protected with blocking devices, Operators trained for geomagnetic storm response. Communication networks have redundancy. Fiber optics backed by hardened satellite systems. Emergency protocols tested regularly. Early warning systems give hours or days of notice. Improved space weather satellites at multiple vantage points. Machine learning models predicting storm impacts with increasing accuracy. And when the storm hits, society hunkers down, rides it out and recovers. Satellite operators put spacecraft into safe mode before the particle storm arrives. Airlines reroute flights away from polar regions. Grid managers balance loads and prepare for induced currents. Emergency services activate backup communication systems. The public receives clear warnings explaining what to expect and what precautions to take. Power flickers, but doesn't fail completely. GPS degrades, but backup navigation systems compensate. Communications experience disruptions, but not blackouts. Within hours or days, normal operations resume. There's economic cost, logistical disruption, some equipment damage, but no civilizational crisis. That's not science fiction. That's achievable with current or near-term technology. The question is whether we'll invest in it, whether we'll prioritize resilience over short-term efficiency, whether we'll build the kind of infrastructure that treats cosmic threats as real and prepares accordingly. The technology exists or will soon. The knowledge exists. What's missing is political will, sustained investment, and cultural shift from reactive disaster response to proactive resilience building. The economic argument is straightforward. Preventing catastrophe is cheaper than recovering from it. A major geomagnetic storm that knocks out continental power grids could cause trillions in economic damage, dwarf the costs of hardening infrastructure and deploying distributed generation. Insurance companies understand this calculus. Militaries understand it. What's needed is translating that understanding into policy and investment, overcoming the inertia of existing systems and the short-term thinking that prioritizes immediate savings over long-term stability. The takeaway here is simple. Emerging energy technology could shape whether the next big solar storm becomes a catastrophe or just a serious manageable disruption. The choices we make now, the investments we prioritize, the infrastructure we build, the resilience we design into our systems, those will determine whether we're ready or not. Fusion power offers a path toward energy infrastructure that's inherently more resilient to cosmic threats. Whether we take that path, whether we build distributed rather than centralized systems, whether we harden our grids and deploy redundancy, those decisions will be made in the coming decades, and they will determine whether our descendants look back on the 21st century as the era when humanity built resilience into civilization, or as the time when we ignored the warnings and paid the price. Part 13. The AI Surge and the Distraction of Progress. Let's talk about another 2025 phenomenon, the artificial intelligence surge. New model releases, massive investments, public hype, code-red research pushes. AI is everywhere. It's transforming industries, automating tasks, generating content, making decisions, and it's sucking up attention, funding, and talent at an extraordinary rate. The scale of investment is staggering. Tech companies are pouring hundreds of billions into AI infrastructure, data centers, training clusters, specialized chips. Venture capital flows toward AI startups at unprecedented rates. Governments are launching national AI initiatives, viewing artificial intelligence as a strategic priority for economic competitiveness and national security. Universities are expanding AI programs, attracting top faculty and graduate students. The brightest minds in computer science, mathematics, and engineering are being pulled into the AI ecosystem, lured by generous compensation, exciting technical challenges, and the promise of working on transformative technology. The AI wave is producing genuine breakthroughs. Large language models demonstrate remarkable capabilities in natural language understanding and generation. Computer vision systems achieve superhuman performance in specialized domains. Reinforcement learning agents solve complex optimization problems. AI-assisted drug discovery accelerates pharmaceutical research. Machine learning models improve weather forecasting, material science, and protein folding predictions. The technology delivers real value across countless applications. Here's the uncomfortable question. Is the AI surge diverting focus from long-term resilience concerns? Are we so focused on the next breakthrough in machine learning, the next model that can pass the next benchmark, that we're ignoring systemic risks like space weather, infrastructure fragility, or cascading failures? There's a resource allocation issue here. Talent and funding are finite. When billions of dollars flow into AI research and development, that's billions not going into space weather forecasting, power grid hardening, or radiation shielding research. When the best engineers and scientists are recruited into AI companies, they're not working on resilience problems. The brightest graduates who might have pursued careers in power systems engineering, space physics, or infrastructure resilience are instead optimizing neural network architectures or training larger language models. The opportunity cost is real, even if it's invisible. Consider the talent pipeline. A gifted physicist might have once joined a national laboratory to study magnetospheric dynamics or develop better space weather models. Today, that same person might receive 10 job offers from AI companies, with salaries 2 or 3 times higher, equity compensation, and the allure of working on cutting-edge technology that dominates headlines. The financial incentives are overwhelming. This isn't a criticism of individual choices, people respond rationally to opportunities, but the aggregate effect is a brain drain from fields that don't generate the same excitement or compensation. The same pattern applies to funding. Government research budgets are stretched. When AI becomes a national priority, funding agencies redirect resources accordingly. Space weather research competes for grants with AI initiatives and often loses. Universities invest in AI labs, not in facilities for studying geomagnetic disturbances. Private philanthropy flows toward AI safety and AI capabilities research, not toward infrastructure resilience against natural threats. The message is clear. AI is where the action is, where careers are made, where impact happens. Everything else is secondary. But there's also a deeper concern, AI-driven dependence. As we automate more systems, as we hand over control to algorithms, as we rely on machine learning for everything from navigation to logistics to financial transactions, we're increasing our dependence on functioning electronics and software. And that means we're increasing our vulnerability to the very cosmic threats we've been discussing. Modern AI systems require sophisticated computational infrastructure. They depend on cloud services, distributed data centers, high-bandwidth networks, and reliable power. They assume that sensors provide accurate data, that communication channels remain open, that hardware functions normally. These assumptions hold under ordinary conditions, but may break down catastrophically during extreme space weather events. An AI system trained on years of normal data has no experience with the anomalies that occur when GPS signals degrade, when communication satellites malfunction, when induced currents corrupt sensor readings. Imagine an AI-controlled smart grid, optimizing power distribution in real time, balancing supply and demand, routing energy through the most efficient pathways. The system makes thousands of decisions per second, far faster than human operators could manage. It anticipates demand patterns, integrates renewable energy sources, minimizes transmission losses, prevents overloads. Sounds great, right? Until a geomagnetic storm induces currents that the AI wasn't trained to handle, and the optimization algorithms make catastrophically wrong decisions, cascading failures across the network faster than human operators can intervene. The AI detects anomalies but misinterprets them, applies solutions optimized for different failure modes, and inadvertently amplifies the problem. By the time humans recognize what's happening and attempt manual control, large sections of the grid have already collapsed. Or imagine autonomous vehicles relying on GPS for navigation, and a solar storm knocks out GPS for hours or days. Suddenly, transportation networks grind to a halt. Delivery trucks can't navigate. Emergency vehicles can't locate addresses. Ride-sharing services fail. The automation that promised efficiency becomes a single point of failure. Vehicles equipped with backup navigation systems might function, but many won't have them. The same logic applies to maritime shipping, aviation, agricultural equipment, and countless other systems that have been designed around the assumption of continuous GPS availability. AI-driven logistics systems optimize supply chains, minimizing inventory, reducing redundancy, maximizing efficiency. These systems are fragile by design, trading resilience for cost savings. When disruptions occur, say, a solar storm that disables satellites, disrupts communications and damages electronics, the just-in-time systems have no buffer. AI scheduling algorithms trained to minimize slack have eliminated the very redundancy that would allow graceful degradation. The result is not a proportional reduction in efficiency, but a complete breakdown. This isn't anti-AI sentiment. AI has enormous potential benefits. Properly designed AI systems could enhance resilience, providing better forecasting, faster anomaly detection, optimized response strategies. Machine learning could analyze space weather data more effectively than human forecasters. AI could manage complex infrastructure in ways that improve robustness against failures. The technology itself is neutral. The question is how we deploy it. But if we're not thinking carefully about how AI systems will behave under extreme conditions, under cosmic weather events, we're setting ourselves up for compound disasters. The scenario to worry about is this. A major solar storm coincides with an AI-driven system failure. The storm disrupts communications, power, and navigation. AI systems trained on normal conditions respond inappropriately to the anomalies. Automated trading algorithms detect unusual patterns and trigger massive sell-offs. Power grid management systems make optimization decisions that cascade into blackouts. Navigation systems provide incorrect guidance. Human operators are overwhelmed, unable to manually override or correct the automated responses quickly enough, and the result is a cascade that's worse than either the storm or the AI failure would have caused alone. This is speculative, yes, but it's not implausible. We've seen algorithmic trading contribute to flash crashes. We've seen automation failures in aviation, where pilots couldn't regain manual control quickly enough. We've seen cascading failures in power grids when protective systems activated simultaneously. These are all small-scale previews of what could happen when AI-driven systems encounter conditions outside their training distributions during a major space weather event. The problem is that AI development is racing ahead without sufficient consideration of extreme event resilience. Training datasets reflect normal conditions, not geomagnetic storms. Testing focuses on typical failure modes, not cosmic disturbances. Safety research concentrates on preventing AI from causing harm through misalignment or misuse, not on ensuring AI systems remain stable when the physical environment becomes chaotic. We're optimizing for performance under ordinary circumstances while creating brittle systems that may fail catastrophically under extraordinary ones. We're doubling down on fragile digital systems, adding layers of complexity and automation, just as the cosmic environment is becoming more hostile. The solar maximum approaches, geomagnetic storms will intensify, space weather will become more severe, and we're making our most critical systems more dependent on electronics, more reliant on algorithms, more vulnerable to the very disruptions that space weather causes. Are we ignoring low-probability, high-impact natural risks in our race for technological progress? Probably. Because natural risks don't generate excitement, don't attract investment, don't get featured in tech demos. Space weather doesn't appear in AI company roadmaps. Infrastructure resilience doesn't feature in machine learning conferences. The researchers building AI systems and the scientists studying space weather inhabit different worlds, attend different conferences, read different journals. There's little crossover, little collaboration, little awareness of how their domains intersect. The AI community focuses on capabilities and safety in abstract terms, alignment, robustness, fairness, but rarely considers resilience against physical disruptions to the infrastructure AI systems depend on. The takeaway is that progress in one domain can deepen vulnerabilities in another. We need holistic resilience thinking, systems-level analysis that considers not just how technologies perform under optimal conditions, but how they fail, how those failures interact, and how we recover when everything goes wrong at once. We need AI researchers and infrastructure experts in the same room, discussing how automated systems should behave during space weather events. We need testing protocols that include cosmic disturbance scenarios. We need backup systems, manual overrides, graceful degradation pathways. We need to design for the worst case, not just the average case, because that's the scenario we should be planning for, the compound disaster where technological advancement and natural catastrophe collide. The AI surge is real, the benefits are genuine, but the vulnerabilities it creates are equally real. Unless we integrate resilience thinking into AI development from the beginning, we risk building a civilization that's extraordinarily capable under normal conditions, but catastrophically fragile when the cosmos reminds us we're not in control. Part 14. Advances in Multi-Messenger Astronomy and Early Warning Lessons. Here's a brighter note. Science is getting better at detecting cosmic threats. 2025 saw continued breakthroughs in multi-messenger astronomy, the practice of observing astronomical events using multiple types of signals. gravitational waves, neutrinos, electromagnetic radiation, cosmic rays. Each messenger provides different information, and combining them gives a more complete picture of violent cosmic events. For example, when a massive star collapses into a black hole, it emits gravitational waves from the collapse, neutrinos from the core bounce, and electromagnetic radiation from the explosion. Detecting all three and correlating them allows astronomers to understand the event in unprecedented detail. Multi-messenger astronomy has already revealed extraordinary insights. The 2017 detection of colliding neutron stars combined gravitational wave data from LIGO with gamma-ray, X-ray, optical and radio observations from dozens of telescopes worldwide. This single event confirmed theories about how heavy elements like gold and platinum are forged in the universe, validated predictions about gravitational wave propagation, and demonstrated the power of coordinated observation across the electromagnetic spectrum. The same principles apply to solar and space weather monitoring. We observe the sun using visible light, X-rays, extreme ultraviolet, radio waves, and in situ particle detectors. Combining these observations gives us early warning of flares, CMEs, and energetic particle events. Modern solar observatories like NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory capture images of the sun every 12 seconds across multiple wavelengths, tracking the evolution of active regions that might produce dangerous eruptions. NOAA's DS-COVA satellite, positioned at the L1 Lagrange point between Earth and the Sun, provides real-time solar wind measurements, giving us 30 to 60 minutes of warning before impacts hit our magnetosphere. The global network of space weather monitors is expanding. Ground-based neutron monitors track cosmic ray variations that signal changes in the heliosphere. Satellite instruments measure particle flux and magnetic field strength in near-Earth space. High-altitude balloon campaigns probe the upper atmosphere for radiation changes. Solar telescopes watch for flares and prominence eruptions. Coronagraphs track CMEs as they blast away from the sun. Each adds a piece to the puzzle, and the data is increasingly shared in real time, allowing for rapid analysis and forecasting. International collaboration has intensified. The International Space Environment Service coordinates data from dozens of countries. The European Space Agency's Space Weather Service network links national forecasting centres. Commercial companies are deploying their own monitoring constellations, recognizing that space weather poses real risks to satellite operations and communications infrastructure. This is the equivalent of building a cosmic meteorological service, a network that can track storms not on Earth but in space and provide warnings before they hit. Early warning matters. If we know a CME is coming, we can take action. Satellite operators can put spacecraft into safe mode, turning off non-essential systems to reduce the risk of damage from induced currents or radiation. Airlines can reroute flights to avoid high radiation regions over the poles, protecting crew and passengers from excessive exposure. Power grid managers can adjust loads, prepare for induced currents in transmission lines, stage repair crews near vulnerable transformers, and balance the grid to minimize the risk of cascading failures. Emergency services can prepare for potential communication disruptions, ensuring backup systems are ready and personnel are alerted. GPS users can be warned about potential accuracy degradation. The difference between no warning and a few hours of warning can be enormous. Consider the practical implications. During the 2003 Halloween storm, several satellites were lost because operators had insufficient warning. With modern forecasting, those losses might have been prevented. During the 1989 Quebec blackout, the speed of the event overwhelmed response capabilities, but with advance notice, grid operators could have taken protective measures. The economic value of accurate space weather forecasting has been estimated in the billions of dollars annually, accounting for prevented satellite damage, avoided flight delays, protected power infrastructure, and maintained communications. But early warning only delivers value if it's matched by preparedness and action. If we detect a major CME headed toward Earth and issue a warning, but nobody knows what to do with that information, the warning is useless. We need operational protocols, decision frameworks, trained personnel, tested procedures. We need to treat space weather warnings like we treat hurricane warnings, seriously, with coordinated response plans and public awareness. Hurricane forecasting improved dramatically over the past 50 years, but the reduction in casualties came not just from better forecasts, but from evacuation plans, building codes, emergency shelters, and public education campaigns. Space weather requires the same comprehensive approach. Yet the response infrastructure lags far behind the detection capabilities. Many power companies have no formal space weather response plans. Most airlines lack standardized procedures for radiation storm rerouting. Satellite operators use widely varying protection strategies. Emergency services rarely include space weather scenarios in their training exercises. The public remains largely unaware that space weather is even a threat, much less what they should do about it. The good news is that the tools for cosmic risk detection are improving. Ground-based telescopes are more sensitive, space-based observatories are more comprehensive, data-sharing networks are more robust, forecasting models are more sophisticated. Machine learning algorithms now pass solar imagery to predict flares with increasing accuracy. Advanced simulations model CME propagation through interplanetary space, refining arrival time estimates. The bad news is that they're not yet matched by the level of preparedness needed to actually mitigate the risks. We're building the sensors, but we're not building the resilience to respond effectively when the sensors sound the alarm. Investment remains unbalanced. Space agencies spend hundreds of millions on observation satellites, but national governments allocate far less to grid hardening, backup systems, or emergency response planning. The warning systems are advancing faster than the protective infrastructure. We can see the threat coming, but we haven't built the shelter. Still, there's reason for hope. Knowledge is growing. The scientific community understands space weather far better than a generation ago. International collaboration is increasing, with data-sharing agreements and joint forecasting efforts spanning continents. The scientific community is taking space weather more seriously, with dedicated conferences, journals, and research programs. Major insurance companies now include space weather in their risk models, bringing financial incentives for mitigation. Defense departments recognize the military implications of satellite and communication disruptions. And as events like November 2025 demonstrate the real-world consequences, political and public attention may follow. Small disruptions serve as wake-up calls, previews of what larger events might bring. The key is to sustain that attention, to translate awareness into action, and to build systems that are robust even when the cosmos throws a curveball. We need the political will to invest in infrastructure hardening, the regulatory frameworks to mandate protective measures, and the public understanding to support necessary expenditures. The path forward is clear even if the execution remains challenging. Expand observation networks, improve forecasting models, develop standardized response protocols, harden critical infrastructure, train personnel, educate the public, test emergency plans. These aren't exotic requirements. They're the same fundamentals that underpin disaster preparedness for terrestrial threats. The takeaway: tools for cosmic risk detection are improving, but they only deliver value if matched by preparedness and action. We're not defenseless, but we're not ready either. The gap between what we can detect and what we can do about it is closing, but it's still too wide. We have the scientific capability to see threats coming. We need the social, political, and infrastructure capacity to actually protect ourselves when they arrive. The sensors are watching. Now we need to build the systems that respond. Part 15. Tech Resilience Checklist and Narrative Conclusion. Let's bring this home with something concrete. We've spent 14 parts diagnosing the problem, exploring the risks, examining the unknowns. We've walked through solar storms and cosmic rays, through aviation mysteries and satellite vulnerabilities, through the hidden fragility of our interconnected digital world. Now it's time to talk about solutions, not vague platitudes or feel-good rhetoric, but actionable steps that stakeholders, from governments to corporations to individuals, can take right now, today, to protect what we've built. First, we need to audit critical infrastructure for radiation resilience. Aviation systems, satellites, power grids, communication networks. Every component needs to be identified and evaluated for vulnerability to single event upsets. We need to test these systems under simulated radiation exposure, not just hope they'll hold up when the real thing hits. Implement error-correcting memory wherever possible. Build in redundant control paths so that when one system fails, another can take over seamlessly. Install radiation-shielded enclosures for the most critical components. Yes, this isn't cheap, but it's far, far cheaper than dealing with catastrophic failures after the fact, when planes are falling from the sky and grids are dark across entire continents. Second, mandate safety-critical software audits across all essential systems. Flight control software, grid management algorithms, satellite control systems, medical devices, financial infrastructure. These systems should be reviewed not just for functional correctness under normal conditions, but for robustness under anomalous conditions. What happens when a single bit flips in memory? What happens when input data arrives corrupted? How quickly can the system detect that something is wrong and recover from the error? We need to build in fail-safes, watchdog timers, graceful degradation protocols. Software shouldn't just work when everything is nominal. It needs to fail safely when things go wrong. Third, expand and fund global space weather monitoring networks. We need more ground-based neutron monitors, more radiation altitude probes on commercial aircraft, more satellite detectors in orbit, more solar telescopes and coronagraphs watching the sun's surface. Real-time data sharing between nations and agencies, international coordination that transcends political boundaries, early warning networks that operate 24/7 and feed directly into operational decision systems at airlines, power companies, satellite operators. This is infrastructure investment, pure and simple, and it should be funded at levels commensurate with the actual risk we face. Fourth, build backup infrastructure paths for when primary systems fail. Satellite spares ready for rapid deployment when radiation damage takes systems offline. Hardwired communication backups that don't depend on satellites. Distributed power systems or microgrids that can island themselves from the main grid during emergencies, keeping hospitals and emergency services running even when the broader system collapses. Offline navigation alternatives for critical applications, because GPS can and will fail during severe space weather events. Redundancy costs money up front, absolutely. But lack of redundancy costs lives and livelihoods when systems fail catastrophically. Fifth, establish serious international coordination mechanisms. Space weather doesn't respect borders or national jurisdictions. A solar storm that disrupts satellites over one continent will affect communications and navigation globally within minutes. We need agencies and industry working together, sharing data in real time, coordinating responses, establishing common protocols for emergency directives and public communication. This is fundamentally a global problem requiring global solutions, and we can't afford the luxury of jurisdictional squabbling when the next big storm arrives. Now, let me summarize the main argument of this entire investigation, because it's important to see the full picture we've been building piece by piece. Humanity is at a crossroads. We've built a high-tech civilization on assumptions of cosmic calm, on the belief that space is vast and empty and fundamentally safe. We've optimized everything for efficiency, for interconnection, for just-in-time logistics and lean supply chains. And in doing so, we've created systems that are exquisitely tuned for nominal conditions, but catastrophically vulnerable to disruption. The November 2025 solar storm was a warning shot. It grounded thousands of aircraft across multiple continents. It exposed vulnerabilities in systems we trust with our lives every single day. It showed us, in stark and undeniable terms, how fragile our technological infrastructure really is. This isn't fear-mongering or sensationalism. This is sober assessment based on hard data, real events, verifiable consequences that we can trace through aviation logs and satellite telemetry. The sun is capable of far worse than what we experienced in November. The Carrington event of 1859 was perhaps 20 times more powerful than anything we've seen in the modern era. And unless we treat space weather as a real systemic danger, unless we invest in resilience, unless we build systems that can withstand cosmic assaults, we're gambling with civilization itself. We're betting everything on the hope that the sun will stay quiet, that cosmic rays will remain at manageable levels, that we'll get lucky. That's not a strategy. That's denial. Let me offer 3 scenarios for what comes next, 3 possible futures we might be heading toward. First, the near-miss scenario. We continue muddling through, reacting to each crisis as it comes. Big solar storms cause widespread disruptions, aviation chaos, satellite losses, GPS outages, economic turbulence. But humanity scrapes by each time. We adapt incrementally, reactively, always one step behind the threat. We patch the most obvious vulnerabilities after they've been exposed. It's painful, it's expensive, but it's survivable. This is the path of least resistance, the path we're currently on. Second, the hard strike scenario. A Carrington-class event or worse hits Earth with little warning. Major grid failures cascade across continents. Satellite constellations suffer massive losses. Long-term power outages lasting weeks or months in some regions, economic cost measured in the trillions of dollars. Social disruption on a scale we haven't seen since World War II. This is the wake-up call nobody wants, the disaster that forces humanity's hand. But it finally, definitively, makes us confront our cosmic fragility and invest seriously in resilience. Sometimes it takes catastrophe to create change. Third, the resilience path. Society chooses proactively and deliberately to invest in hardening and redundancy before disaster strikes. We learn to live with cosmic threats as a permanent feature of our reality. We build infrastructure that treats space weather as a fundamental design constraint, not an afterthought or edge case. We create systems with deep redundancy, with graceful failure modes, with the ability to survive and recover from extreme events. We emerge stronger, more prepared, more conscious of our place in a universe that's beautiful and awe-inspiring, but fundamentally indifferent to our survival. Which path we take is up to us. The sun will do what it does, following laws of physics that don't care about human civilization. Cosmic rays will keep raining down from deep space, accelerated by distant supernovas and galactic magnetic fields. The universe doesn't care whether we're ready. But we can choose how we respond. We can choose resilience over complacency. We can choose to watch not just the skies for distant threats, but our own infrastructure for present vulnerabilities. We can choose to build a civilization that's robust, not brittle. This is not just astronomy. This is not just science fiction or abstract speculation. This is real, present-day, Earth-scale risk unfolding right now. The biggest space threat to humanity in the immediate future isn't a mysterious interstellar object passing through the outer solar system. It's not aliens or asteroids or black holes. It's our own sun, our neighborhood star, paired with a global civilization built on fragile, interconnected digital systems that were never designed for the cosmic environment we actually inhabit. But here's the thing, and this is crucial. We're not helpless. We have knowledge. We have data. We have technology and engineering capability that would seem like magic to our ancestors. We have the ability to prepare, to harden systems, to build resilience into our infrastructure. The question isn't whether we can protect ourselves, it's whether we'll act on that ability before the next big strike, whether we'll choose foresight over hindsight. So watch the skies, yes. Keep tracking those sunspots and solar flares, monitor space weather forecasts, but more importantly, watch your infrastructure. Question the assumptions built into the systems you rely on every day. Demand transparency from manufacturers and regulators about radiation hardening and software robustness. Support investment in resilience, even when it seems expensive in the short term. Because the cosmic dice are rolling every single day, and the next roll might not be in our favor. With awareness, with data, with action, we might not just survive, we might even thrive. But only if we stop pretending the threat doesn't exist. Only if we face the reality of our cosmic vulnerability with clear eyes and determined action. The countdown has already started. What we do next will determine whether we're ready when it reaches 0.